When people fall victim to the brutality of a totalitarian regime, or experience the chaos that occurs when there is no government at all, they may ask a question that is at the heart of political philosophy. What justifies the power the state has over its citizens? 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes characterized life without government as a war of all against all, in which life is nasty, brutish, and short. People agreed to form a government simply to protect themselves from each other. This act of consent came to be known as the social contract theory.
Social contract theory is really an answer to what is traditionally called the problem of political obligation, although there are probably two problems here rather than one, but they're related problems. Firstly, there's the most basic problem of why should we obey the state? Why should we do such things as pay taxes, which people generally don't like doing, and a lot of other things which the state requires us to do? The other question, which is obviously related to the first, is what are the limits of political obligation? Are there any circumstances in which we are justified in resisting the state, either through passive civil disobedience or through taking up arms against the state, rebelling against the state?
Social contract theory had its origins in the ideas of Plato and Socrates, and gained prominence in 17th century England during the time of the English Civil War. Not only was it a weapon that could be used against the divine right of kings, but a rallying cry for Puritans and other religious minorities who fled Western Europe for America. Philosopher John Locke supported the people's right to dissent.
He was concerned, above all, to justify rebellion against tyrannical regimes. In justifying rebellion, he came up with a view of how the state gets set up and of what its legitimate functions are, which is different from that which you find in Hobbes. Locke argues that life in the state of nature would not be as nasty, brutish, and short as Hobbes suggests, and that the state of nature, life without government, would have inconveniences, but wouldn't be the hell that Hobbes thinks it would be.
The major problem Locke attributes to the state of nature is the difficulty of protecting personal property.
If man, in the state of nature, be so free as has been said, and if he be absolute lord of his own person and possessions, why will he part with his freedom and subject himself to the dominion and control of another power? To which is it obvious to answer that though in the state of nature the enjoyment of the property he has in this state is very unsafe, very insecure, this makes him willing to quit this condition, which, however free, is full of fears and continual dangers, and it is not without reason that he seeks out and is willing to join in society with others for the mutual preservation of their lives, liberties, and estates, which I call by the general name property. The great and chief end, therefore, of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property.
The kind of government that is actually created depends on the will of the majority. Whatever form it takes, the legitimacy of the government is based on the social contract forged by the people themselves.
Locke tends to think of the relationship between citizens and government in terms of a almost a legal relationship of trust, where the state is our trustee, if the state violates its relation of trust, if, for instance, the state starts violating people's natural rights to life and liberty, if it tries to enslave them or to put them to death in a way that's unjustified, then, according to Locke, our obligation to obey the state is at an end. And we are entitled to criticize the state, indeed even rebel against it when it violates its trust.
Locke believes that if such a violation occurs and people revolt, they do not revert to a state of nature, but become once again a community of people intent on creating a government. He regards this as an obligation and a safeguard against constant rebellion. Historically, social contract theory had far-reaching consequences. Locke's version in particular provided the framework for the United States Declaration of Independence and was the forerunner of liberal political thought. Despite its impact, acceptance of social contract as a justification for government's existence was in rapid decline by the end of the 18th century. As philosopher David Hume observed, there is no evidence that such a contract ever existed. In fact, the very idea of government would be far beyond the comprehension of savages in the state of nature.
Almost all the governments which exist at present, or of which there remains any record in history, have been founded originally either on usurpation or conquest or both, without any pretense of a fair consent or voluntary subjection of the people. Were you to ask the far greatest part of the nation whether they had ever consented to the authority of their rulers or promised to obey them, they would be inclined to think very strangely of you.
The idea of social contract as the justification for governmental power had been dormant for centuries, when, in the early 1970s, John Rawls proposed a new way of looking at it.
Rawls's famous book, A Theory of Justice, uses the apparatus of the social contract tradition, imagining people in an idealized situation, a hypothetical situation, and deciding the rules of justice behind what Rawls calls the veil of ignorance.
Suppose people interested in forming a society gather together in a large meeting room. No one in the room knows what position he or she will have in the new society: rich, poor, male, female, healthy, sick. Behind this veil of ignorance, people must choose the basic rules or principles that will govern their future society.
The original position of equality corresponds to the state of nature in the traditional theory of the social contract. This original position is not, of course, thought of as an actual historical state of affairs, much less as a primitive condition of culture. It is understood as a purely hypothetical situation, characterized so as to lead to a certain conception of justice.
It's Rawls's contention that people will create just rules if for no other reason than to protect themselves should fate place them at the bottom of the social ladder. Two principles of justice will prevail.
The first requires equality in the assignment of basic rights and duties, while the second holds that social and economic inequalities, for example, inequalities of wealth and authority, are just only if they result in compensating benefits for everyone, and in particular for the least advantaged members of society.
People have sometimes criticized it because they've argued that some of us might like to gamble. You know, if the odds were good enough, we'd go for it. But there also are problems in how he sets up that scene, because he assumes that in designing this ideal society, we don't know anything about what's really valuable. And you have to ask, why not?
I don't believe that government is legitimate only if the people have consented. That seems to me to go too far, and I'm not even sure what the consent in question would be. But I do insist that it's not legitimate unless, or fully legitimate, because these are always matters of degree, unless it's deeply egalitarian, and egalitarian in the sense that each citizen is an equal partner in a collective enterprise of self-government. You can't expect someone to think of himself as an equal partner in a joint venture if the ground rules are organized without taking any account of his own fate. So I think people at the bottom economically have got every right in most countries today to say, you say that I'm an equal partner in this venture, but you have set up these distribution rules so that I'm born into poverty and I will die in poverty and my children will die in poverty too. How can you tell me that I have an equal stake in this joint venture? I think that speaks not just to the justice of the state, but to its legitimacy.
In proposing structures of government that will give people a fair chance in life, Rawls favors individual rights over other values that might emerge from society.
The priority of these rights means first that individual rights cannot be sacrificed for the sake of the general good. And second, that the principles of justice that specify these rights cannot be based on any particular vision of the good life.
Even if you're going to make the whole community happier on average or in total, there are certain things you can't do to particular individuals, even for that goal. You might say this is the theory of trumps. Individuals have rights, and these are trumps over the social good.
Liberals argue against the state supporting any one set of values. Government must be neutral and allow individuals the right to choose their own values and ends. In recent decades, this modern interpretation of social contract has been criticized by a diverse group of philosophers known as communitarians. Their belief in the importance of belonging to a community of people who share a culture and a common set of values represents yet another response to the question of what justifies the state. Some of their ideas can be traced to Greek philosophy and to the writings of Aristotle.
Aristotle didn't think that politics and government were artificial human constructions. He thought that politics arose from nature, from human nature. The reason it was important to develop the capacities to share in self-rule, according to Aristotle, is that that was the only way we could fully realize our humanity. It was the only way to call forth certain qualities of character to do with judgment and deliberation.
The proof that the state is a creation of nature and prior to the individual is that the individual, when isolated, is not self-sufficing, and therefore he is like a part in relation to the whole. But he who is unable to live in society, or who has no need because he is sufficient for himself, must be either a beast or a god. He is no part of a state. A social instinct is implanted in all men by nature.
To live the good life, to be flourishing human beings with the full range of capacities unfolded, required that we engage in public life, in the life of the polis. That's why for Aristotle, politics isn't an artificial creation of human beings for the sake of their convenience. It's a necessary, natural expression of certain capacities that human beings have.
I'm having some concern not feeling comfortable about plus.
Aristotle places strong value on people's ability to rule themselves. Later traditions refer to this capacity as republicanism. Not only is the state created by the people, it educates and molds citizens in the shared ideals of self-rule, culture, and the common good. The idea that the state nurtures the culture and common good of the community reappeared in the writings of German philosopher Hegel.
It's kind of our bottom line balance.
Hegel, like Aristotle, saw the family as the most basic human group. His way of saying that the family is biologically inescapable. When children grow up and move beyond the family, they form new bonds that immerse them in the values of the culture.
The basic idea is that there's a kind of harmony, a kind of unity here, which is a real achievement, but it's also that in some sense is something that's already there from the start. And the idea is to show us that how the state is something that grows out of our many attempts to understand ourselves, to get along with one another, to conceive of what our relationships are. And the state, in his view, is the highest form of this.
It is within the state, Hegel asserts, that a person becomes actualized. By subordinating personal interests to the larger common good, true freedom is achieved.
Freedom can't be attained just by the individual exercising his rights and respecting the rights of others, because it requires a kind of political formation, a development of certain virtues, an orientation to the common good. But the orientation to the common good requires that we have particular communities or particular goods within civil society, or within the estates, as Hegel called them.
55 miles is a minimum.
In order to prepare people to participate in political life, the state needs to educate and integrate its citizens into the institutions and values of civil society.
What counts in a state is the practice of acting according to a common will. The state is the realization of freedom, of the absolute final purpose, and exists for its own sake. All the value a man has, all spiritual reality, he has only through the state. The state is the foundation and center of all other concrete aspects of national life, or art, law, morality, religion, science.
That, it seems to me, is a powerful insight of Hegel's that's relevant to our time, because what we see now in the modern world, in modern politics, is a tendency to emphasize the rights of the individual and then to emphasize the claims of the universal, kind of cosmopolitan, moral or political ethic. But what that leaves out is the great in-between. It leaves out the institutions of civil society that could possibly create the characters, could provide the kind of civic education that could draw people out of their own self-interested pursuits, cultivate an orientation to the common good. It's hard to cultivate a commitment to the common good when it's so abstract as to be the universal community of humankind.
From Aristotle and Hegel to the present day, communitarians have been convinced that the state must support and nurture the traditions the community values.
Certain obligations, we might call them obligations of membership or solidarity, arise not because we've chosen them, nor because they're duties we owe persons in virtue of our common humanity, but because they express the ties, the moral bonds that implicate us in traditions, cultures, communities of membership.
And of course, I got a very vivid sense of that growing up as a Chinese American, of how important that was, and of the sorts of virtues expected of people in order to contribute to that common good of a shared life. Filial piety, one central virtue of Chinese Confucian morality. To be a good son, to be prepared to honor one's parents, to be constantly concerned about their welfare. And the Confucians really extended that model of the family as a small community that constituted the fulfillment of individuals to society at large. The good of the individual consisted in a contribution to not just the family, but to larger forms of community that enclosed the family.
Consider, for example, the case of the pilot, the bomber pilot fighting for free France during World War II, who does bombing runs over occupied Vichy France. One day, he looks at his assignment, and the village he's to bomb is his own village, the town from where he comes. And he takes the position, I can't be the one to drop the bombs on this village. These are my people. It would be a kind of violation of a moral tie that I can't turn my back on. I agree that for the sake of the cause, it should be bombed, but someone else will have to take that mission today, not me. Now, is that just squeamishness? Is that just weakness of will, a form of prejudice? Or is it an act of integrity and expression of a kind of moral bond that is worthy of admiration? I would say the second. But the second answer presupposes that there are certain moral claims, ties, that make a difference, that should weigh in the balance in moral action, even apart from choice, even apart from the duties we owe human beings as such.
This emphasis on the common good places communitarians in direct conflict with liberals, who claim the state must leave people free to pursue their own values.
Your brother?
In some respects, the communitarian label is misleading because it suggests that the alternatives are between liberal rights, which respect the individual on the one hand, and defenders of community who are against rights and against the individual on the other hand. But those seem to me to be false alternatives. The real issue within political philosophy is between those who defend a version of liberalism and rights that says government should be neutral among ends.
Don't try to rank different ways of being as better or worse. Just think of what, in a sense, we owe each other as equal, rational human beings. It's as though you abstracted from, if you like, the content of people's search for the good life and looked only at the constraints of how they do it, and how they do it must be consistent with their respect for each other and their equality.
Liberals, it is true, are dedicated to the proposition that individual citizens need space in which to develop for themselves ideals and goals and a sense of what would make a successful life for them. So one individual might think that a successful life lies in a rather traditional kind of life, rooted in family and rooted in allegiance to nation and community. Another person might think that the right life for him or her consists in a much more eccentric, violent kind of rebellion, wearing clothes that signal a kind of revolt from everything traditional. What liberals say about this is that a society should be engineered so that people are free to do what they want, even when the majority thinks the lives they are creating for themselves are bad lives.
Now, I think this is a completely unrealistic goal. It just cannot possibly work out. For instance, there are some goals that are so intrinsically bound up with a liberal society, a free, democratic liberal society, like, for instance, the value of ruling ourselves by participatory democracy. I don't see how we could do anything but inculcate in our kids and in our whole society that it's better to participate, to vote, to take part, to serve on juries, et cetera, than rather than sitting back and watching television and letting the whole thing flow by, because a democratic society can't survive unless a substantial number of its people really believe that this participation is worthwhile for itself. We can strive to be as open as possible. I think we should be as open as possible and allow as much space as possible for different ways of life. But we can't simply say, take this whole domain of what's good in the way of bringing up children and living in families and just retreat from it altogether and say, anything goes. It's just impractical.
Committee will come to order. Senator
In
Biden
recent years, communitarianism has been accused of being conservative and indulging in nostalgia for a way of life that no longer exists.
us to proceed.
We can't assume that just because certain norms were the norms of the communities in which we were raised, that therefore they are universal moral values, that they are appropriate ways of living for all of us. We know that communities in human history have featured all sorts of unjust and deeply, deeply immoral social practices. Communities have regarded slavery as permissible. Communities have subordinated women to men. Communities have subordinated one racial group to another.
What always makes me afraid is that communitarianism traditionally has a very difficult time with what we would call multiculturalism. I'm worried, first of all, because I'm very much an individualist, whatever my philosophy, and I'm always worried what happens to the eccentric, what happens to the person that doesn't quite fit in a communitarian philosophy.
For many communitarians, these problems can be solved by reasoned public debate.
The Republican tradition doesn't aim at agreement or even consensus. It aims at a certain kind of disagreement. What matters is that the disagreement be about the public good, the common good, and not just an adding up or an aggregation of individual self-interest constrained by a structure of rights.
What we're suffering from today, I think, is in various directions incredibly and sometimes crude one-sided theories that nobody would adopt for a minute if they just stood back and looked at what a complex thing a free society is. You know, it's got to be rights, it's got to be self-rule, it's got to be a certain amount of individual freedom, there's got to be a sense of common commitment, or you have people not voting or not participating anymore. You need all these things. And what we need is to have either a ban on theory, or better still, insistence that the theory has to be as complex and sensitive to the complex reality as the reality is itself.
So what I would like to do is to work out some notion of prosperity, overall prosperity, some notion of individual rights and freedoms, and some notion of virtue that mesh together so we can embrace them as a unity. And we can say, these are all values, and if we really want to live out of the values, it would be nice if philosophy could show us how we can understand each of these values, each one from the perspective of the others.